Well, g'day again. Today we're going to look at contracts. Contracts being the most important part of the way business is conducted right around the world. Now, we're going to be looking at what happens if a contract is going wrong. So we're going to be looking at a number of things, including this unilateral mistake. But first of all, we'll look at amerida fidei, which is a maximate law, which means it is law. So perfect good faith, abundant good faith, that's what amerida fidei means. This phrase is used to express that a contract must be made in perfect good faith, concealing nothing. As in the case of insurance, the insured must observe the most perfect good faith towards the insurer. So if you don't, it's like coming into equity with clean hands. You must have perfect good faith when you sign a contract. Otherwise, it's null and void. The next bit we'll look at is mutuality of contract. The requirement that all rules must apply to all parties to a contract for the contract to be enforceable. Just get that clear. All the rules must apply to all parties. Otherwise, the contract must be rejected by all parties. No party is allowed to have an unfair advantage of partially applied rules under any legal contract. So we've looked at amerida fidei, mutuality of contract. Now let's see what uni means. Uni means one or single. So if you know what a unicycle is, it's a one-wheeled cycle. Then we look at Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, which is unilateral, one-sided, ex parte, having relation to only one of two or more persons or things. Then we go to the New Zealand Law Dictionary, 8th edition, unilateral mistake. That form of mistake where only one party is mistaken. Such a contractual mistake on the part of one party will frequently be induced by the misrepresentation of the other party. This form of contractual mistake is recognized by the Contractual Mistakes Act 1977, Section 6. Now this is New Zealand law. I quote everything in New Zealand, so okay, Contractual Mistakes Act. Relief may be granted where mistake by one party is known to the opposing party or is common or mutual. A court may, in the course of any proceedings or on an application made for the purpose, grant relief under Section 7 to any party to a contract. A. If entering into that contract, the party was influenced in his decision to enter into the contract by a mistake that was material to him, and the existence of the mistake was known to the other party or one or more of the other parties to the contract, not being a party or parties having substantially the same interest under the contract as the party seeking relief. Or, now just before we go on to the or, so when you signed up your driver's license, did you know everything about what you were signing? Because there's a contractual mistake there. Or B, the mistake or mistakes, as the case may be, resulted at the time of the contract, I, in a substantially unequal exchange of values, or 2, in the conferment of a benefit or in the imposition or inclusion of an obligation, which was, in all the circumstances, a benefit or obligation substantially disproportionate to the consideration therefore. Okay, so when you signed up your driver's license, you didn't realize that you only needed a license if you were conducting commerce. In other words, if you were driving a truck for business or a taxi, then you need a driver's license. But we went into it under the wrong impression, and therefore it is a mistake under the Contractual Mistakes Act. Now there is another way you can get around this other than through legislation, and that's the counter deed. Now I found this site online earlier this year, and I paid to join the site so that you could actually get a lot more information, which is what I did. And this is what it says on their site. The solution is the secret deed. The distinction must be made as to which side, public or private, the name belongs. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that the surname Doe is the public face, or your father's name, it's the public name, whereas John Henry is the private. Now, so we signed everything up under the birth certificate, which is the public side of the ledger. If no secret deed is found to counter the registration for a sole proprietor name, we will always be presumed falsely to be acting in the capacity of a public sole proprietor business and be subject to their regulations. These regulations were only made for public businesses by the government, corporate entities, and statutes. Counter deeds correct the record by rebutting the presumptions that the name you're using is a public business when you are in fact a living being. The problem could have been avoided altogether if one had used their given Christian given name when in their private capacity out in the public. However, these days everyone is presumed to be doing business while out in public. Without a counter deed by rebuttal, the doctrine of merger does not apply. So the presumption stands as accepted. Men were meant to be free and businesses to be regulated. Because businesses are fictions and therefore must be known to be held responsible for their actions. Now, private is belonging to some particular person, and a counter deed is a secret deed that is executed before a notary or under a private seal. Now, we don't need to go before a notary, we do it under our own private seal. A counter deed destroys, invalidates, voids, or alters a public deed. Now, the difference, I've got the website up there where you can find this, but the difference between deeds and agreements. What is a deed? A deed is a special type of binding promise or commitment to carry out an act. A deed can pass legal or equitable interest in property or other rights. A deed can create a binding obligation on a person, and you know who the person is, it's the fiction. A deed can affirm an agreement that passes legal or equitable interest in property or other rights. Now you'll see that everything is about your rights. So by doing a counter deed, you're going to get your rights back. And these are the essentials for a deed. A deed must be in writing. A deed must be signed. A deed must be witnessed by at least one person who is not a party to the deed. A deed must be expressed to be a deed. A deed must be delivered to the other party. A deed must be supported by evidence that the parties intended to execute the document as a deed and be legally bound by it. What is the difference between a deed or an agreement? Generally, all contracts are agreements. However, all agreements are not necessarily legally enforceable contracts. So you've got to get that clear in your head. The main difference between a deed and agreement are that there is no requirement for consideration in order for a deed to be binding. You don't need to pay a deposit. Like most contracts, you need to pay a deposit for the contract to be binding. Whereas a deed is between two parties, you and your person, the person being the surname. A deed is binding on a party when it has been signed, sealed, and delivered to the other party, even if the other party has not yet executed the document. Do you think a corporate fiction can sign? You have to do it for him. The deed has been signed and sealed, but what about the element of delivery? Delivery can be inferred from any fact or circumstance, including words or conduct. Merely executing the document in the form of a deed does not itself imply delivery, unless it appears that execution was intended to constitute delivery. Execution means signing the document. So here's how it all began. When we were born, our parents registered us into the private company because they were told they had to. So in our case, it's birth, deaths, and marriages. All around the world, you have different names for where you register your children, but we have birth, deaths, and marriages in here. Now, the registration created a birth certificate plus a live birth certificate or printout or extract, whatever it pertains to your country. Whenever we applied for benefits from the government, we were asked for our birth certificate. So the first one that most people go for is a bank account. So when you're young, you get your bank account sorted out. Then you get to the age where you can get a driver's license. Then you go on further and get a passport. Okay, we now need to counter what we did wrong. Okay, because we used the public document to register for all those things, we now need to use or to correct the wrongs, we need to do counter deeds, and we'll need several counter deeds because there were several things that we did wrong. But be aware that if you're going to use or get rid of your driver's license, you won't be able to hire a car, you won't be able to buy a car. There's a lot of drawbacks, so just be careful with whatever you're going to be doing. You will need to use the birth certificate that got us into the system and put our counter deed on the back of it. So you'll need a brand new birth certificate for each time you go in and put a counter deed on the back of it. You will need to do this with your passport, your driver's license, bank accounts, etc., etc. You will need to use a new birth certificate for every deed, and will need to use your seal and stamps accordingly. Okay, so you'll need to put your dollar stamp up on the top right. Put your barcode from your registered mail. You put your 5-cent stamp on the back bottom right hand corner of the back. Put your seal there and get your witnesses to sign it. Now, if we do all of those, we've counted all our documents, we should be on the private side of the ledger. Now, please feel free, although I don't reply to the comments in the bottom there to avoid trolls, please feel free to put any successes or anything that you discover in your research in the comments below. Share it with others, and it's the sharing of this information that will get us to the final place. Thank you all.